It's mediocre. 5 out of 10. Oh, you wanted an explanation as to why this game got that score and why you should care? Well, the game certainly didn't seem to care about explaining why the fuck I should care. But fine. It's my job after all. Well, not really my job, but you know what I mean. So, Assassin's Creed Chronicles China is part of a new endeavor by Ubisoft to deliver a trilogy of 2.5D platformers in the Assassin's Creed franchise that take place in China, Russia, and India, respectively. I've heard a lot of people getting up in arms over this, saying because these games exist, they won't make us mainstream titles in these locations. But no, I strongly doubt that. However, this does seem like a rather cynical attempt to pacify people who've been wanting those settings for years. But enough with the prelude. You want to know about the game itself, right? Chronicles China follows the assassin Xiao Jun, the last assassin of the Chinese Brotherhood. She was first introduced in a short film called Assassin's Creed Embers, which was a 20-minute film that came with the first copies of Assassin's Creed Revelations, which tells the tale of Ezio in the twilight of his life, after his retirement from being an assassin. It's a good film, and does a good job rounding off Ezio's story, culminating in a rather cheerful and melancholic ending for those who have played through Revelations. Oh right, I was talking about this game. Sorry, it wasn't terribly interesting. Templars stole the box Ezio gave to June, and then you have to kill them, but then you don't get the box. There, spoiled the entire game for you. There wasn't much else. There were some rather weak attempts at emotional scenes, but you're not given nearly enough time to give a shit about what happens to anyone due to the lack of development. The gameplay does a good enough job transferring the mechanics of the main series Assassin's Creed games to the second dimension by focusing on platforming and stealth puzzles. The biggest changes I found noteworthy were the fields of views of the enemies, which are limited to a certain distance ahead of them. Unrealistic, but I'll let it slide, because not doing so would lead to a lot of frustration, and there's a fair bit of that as is. Generally, when the gameplay and AI work correctly, it's rather wonderful and invigorating. Sadly, however, the level design can be rather shit. Around the halfway point of the game, about 2 hours, some of the scenarios can be a tad unfair and force you into sections where it's almost impossible to not get caught by guards, which wouldn't bother me if the game didn't remind you of how shit you are whenever you reach a checkpoint by rating your assassinness as bronze, silver, or gold. If there was a way to turn it off, I recommend doing so to avoid getting frustrated, if you're a perfectionist like myself. I'd have checked, but the game was already over by the time I was getting fed up with it. For the most part, the mission structure is fine, but when 1/4 feels unfairly skewed against the player, there's something wrong. Another thing that struck me was the combat system. It's actually pretty interesting. It's focused on blocking rather than parrying, and it's pretty challenging. On its own, the combat is good. Unfortunately, the problem lies with how unforgiving it is. If the checkpoint ratings weren't enough to frustrate, this pushes it over the edge by not making escaping combat scenarios easier. There's no flight or fight if you're surrounded, only fight. And God forbid an archer or gunner enters the fray. The gameplay has some really cool ideas that felt fresh, but as with most games, it fell short in execution. The visuals of the game are nice. During gameplay, they go for a water-painted style, but as nice as it is, I can't shake the thought that it's just a hollow attempt to cover up the lack of time and effort put into this title. The cutscenes have a different art style, but I wasn't terribly impressed by it. It didn't work well for the cutscenes, at the very least. The soundtrack exists. The few instances I noticed it, it was alright. That's it. So yeah, 5 out of 10. It's mediocre. The story is practically non-existent, the gameplay lacks polish, and the rest just kinda stagnates. The game isn't worth your time or money. As a huge Assassin's Creed fan, this entire experience just shines a light on Ubisoft's cynical attempts to nickel and dime us for everything we've got, just because of our love of the series. The last time this happened was them announcing both Assassin's Creed Rogue and Unity the same year, within a month of each other. At which point I dropped the series for a year out of disgust. Ubisoft, if you're listening, I'm not entirely against you doing yearly releases, but when you pull shit like double main series releases the same year, and this insulting attempt at a trilogy, you do little more than fill me with ire for the series I love, and I hate that. Don't make me hate you, Ubisoft. Don't make me hate you.